This is a number 4 Stanley hand plane that I picked up for $25. And as I'm sure you can tell, it's seen better days. Given the sorry state that it's currently in, it'll need some serious attention to get it back on its feet. To get myself started, I did a little digging online to see what information I could find on this plane, as I had no experience either using, sharpening or repairing them up until now. What I wasn't expecting was the absolute rabbit hole I was about to fall into, as there is enough information online to write a PhD dissertation on Stanley hand planes alone. Considering I dropped out of university, writing a PhD dissertation is probably off the cards. But this information does make identifying my hand plane fairly easy. While researching, I came across an excellent repository of information in Patrick A. Leach's plane type study, as well as a flowchart to date Stanley hand planes. After going through the steps of the flowchart, I ended up with a Type 15, telling us it was manufactured between 1931 and 1932. Although it does appear that in my case, a replacement plane iron's been used at some point, as Type 15s originally came with a plane iron bearing the beloved Sweetheart logo. At 93 years old, this plane is a real veteran. Though rusty and neglected, it definitely needs some love before it's ready to see action again. And unfortunately, I can't just put it in the dishwasher and call it a day. I began by disassembling the plane to get a better idea of what condition it was in. Luckily, after a wipe down, it appeared to mostly be surface rust, and to remedy this, the parts got a good soak in rust remover. As the screws holding the frog onto the sole were stuck, I placed both pieces into rust remover to see if this would be enough to loosen things up. With all the rust removed and a quick wipe down, things were looking much better already, and I can get started on lapping and sharpening the plane iron. Considering I had never done this before and didn't want to ruin the plane iron, or worse, make a fool of myself on the internet, I followed the instructions of Matt Esley's video on sharpening plane irons, which I've linked below. I begin the process on a 1000 grit whetstone and set my honing guide at 25 degrees to grind the primary bevel. Once the primary bevel was ground, I moved on to the process of lapping the iron, which in simple terms means making sure that it's flat. Starting on the 1000 grit, I quickly realised this was going to take a very long time, as there was a decent amount of pitting along the blade of the iron which would need to be removed if I was going to have any chance of getting a decent edge on it. It also had some kind of coating which was gumming up the whetstone, and I eventually ended up scraping this off. Off screen, I resorted to using sandpaper on a sheet of glass to remove the bulk of the material, as after a good 45 minutes at 1000 grit, I wasn't making much progress. Once I was done on the sandpaper and 1000 grit, I then moved to a 6000 grit stone to finish the lapping off. There was still a very small amount of pitting, but after roughly 3 hours, I'd had enough and was ready to move on. With the lapping of the iron out of the way, I could grind the secondary bevel at 30 degrees, which would provide the cutting edge of the plane. I achieved this with only a few pulls along the 1000 grit stone, and then moved onto the 6000 grit, following Matt's advice by putting a small camber on the iron. I wanted to show the process in which I did that. However, I succeeded in only getting my head in the way of the entire shot. For a more in-depth look at the process, I definitely recommend checking out Matt Esley's video on sharpening plane irons. Now, with the last step being finishing the iron up on the strop, it was time to test if I was successful or if all my effort had resulted in abject failure. With my ability to slice a piece of cardstock put to the side, I was happy with the results and was ready to move on to the lever cap. Now, despite having a bath in rust remover earlier, there was still some old paint, and considering I was going to attempt to restore the nickel plating using electroplating for the first time, I wanted to remove anything that could possibly cause the plating to fail, and as you'll see in a bit, I'd need all the help I could get. To do this, I thought I hadn't tried enough firsts in this video and decided to add electrolysis to that list. So with an old PC power supply that was definitely not dodgily connected to some alligator clips, and some carbonate soda I picked up from the store, I was off to the races. The premise is simple. Add the soda to some water, stick in a sacrificial anode connected to the positive lead. Place the item to be cleaned in my case the lever cap, and connect it to the negative lead to create the cathode. Switch on the power supply and watch the magic happen. Once the majority of the paint was gone, it was done, and any remaining paint was easily removed with a gentle wire brushing. Then it got a thorough cleaning to remove any grease and a final rinse in distilled water, and it was ready for plating. Now, I made my nickel acetate out of pure nickel guitar strings, as I was too impatient to wait for a nickel anode to ship from eBay, and the only local plating shop refused to sell me a nickel anode that wasn't part of a $500 kit. But I was desperate, and knew just enough to be dangerous. So in my desperation, I turned to music, not for inspiration, but to strip it for its precious to me metals. Due to my impatience and lack of planning, I also had to use the now disintegrating guitar strings as my anode for the nickel plating. Be a miracle if this works. We're losing guitar string quickly. After roughly 40 minutes of repositioning the lever cap in the hope of an even plating, it was finally time to reveal the result. And all I can say is that it really was a miracle that it worked at all. With that done, it was on to repainting the logo. Once the lever cap and sole were dry, it was ready to reassemble. Once the frog was fitted, I could put the iron and chip breaker in, the front handle on, and finally secure everything with the lever cap. Before attempting any planing, I did some basic setup by laterally adjusting the plane iron so it was protruding an even amount on both sides, and then I fully retracted it. Then it was time to test it out by slowly and incrementally lowering the blade using the adjusting nut until it starts to make some fine shavings. All things considered, I'm happy with the results, and while I'm sure my technique could do with improvement, the plane is working beautifully. And with that done, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leave a like and comment, and consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time on Beanweek Tinkering.